My name is David Shih. I'm Associate Professor of English, and the course that we're talking about is English 284, Introduction to Theory and Criticism. This course is one of the core courses for our English major, and it's a course that introduces students to particular histories of thought, which conveniently we call theories, that ask students to go below the surface when it comes to understanding the meaning of texts, including lots of literature, but also including texts that might encompass film, television, other areas of popular culture. So the way that we reach our objectives, which is to engage with these particular theories and think about them in conjunction with these texts, is to read about theory and then also read the theories themselves at the same time that we look at some texts from popular culture, also literary texts, to try to understand how those texts help to illustrate some of the concepts and terms from these particular theories, which would include structuralism, post-structuralism, queer theory, feminist theory, post-colonial theory, Marxism, psychoanalysis. So the course is set up in a very student-centered way with lots of discussion. I believe the course is capped at 25 students. So while there can be moments of lecture in the course, a lot of it a lot of the discussion is generated by students through what I call reading questions, which is that a certain number of students every class will submit some questions about the reading for that day, usually about the theory that we're reading about or the actual theory itself that we're reading that day. And then these become the way that we kick off the class by addressing student concerns about the reading. And so I'll try to fill in the blanks if I feel as though we're missing something crucial about a particular theory. But generally I like the class to begin with the questions that the students themselves have. So whatever lecture happens in the class happens through those moments, and then also through moments of other questions that might come in from the other students in the class that day. So there isn't usually any period where I'll be standing in front of the class and talking for an extended period of time. Well, I want them to take away the knowledge that we all operate theoretically when it comes to making meaning out of our world. That it can seem as though we occupy an objective, non-theoretical stance when we try to evaluate a novel, when we think about our own writing, when we watch a movie. But it's just that the theories that have made sense or made meaning of those texts for us have become so dominant and perhaps so popular that they no longer even come across to us as theories. They might be thought of simply as common sense. And so we're always operating theoretically, even though we might not realize it. And then we can see how that might not be so good for us, to understand that we live, objectively with the world, and that we ourselves aren't guided by particular ideologies or interests. So that would be a very important thing that I would want students to recognize, and that it can also be quite fun to think about text this way, to understand how much power we have as interpreters, as readers. So much of that power kind of by default given over to the texts themselves, so much authority given over to, say, authorial intention, right? That that kind of disempowers us as makers of meaning. So having a good understanding of the history of thought that I call theory kind of returns a lot of that authority and power to the students. I think too often theory and what we've come to call literature often seem as though they're opposed, as though theory kind of does something to literature that it's not supposed to do, or that somehow kind of damages or disrespects literature, if you will. And I generally think that we have it backwards when we think about the relationship between theory and literature. That I think the general belief is that we should learn the theory so that we can know the text better. So that, I don't know, we learn feminist theory so that we can read this particular Victorian novel better. I think that's backwards. I think we should read the Victorian novel so that we know feminism better. That is, rather than the theory leading you to a better understanding of the text, that approach really still kind of centers the text and disempowers the reader. But if we think about a Victorian novel maybe in the same way that we would think about a popular TV show or movie, we engage with all of those texts so that we can come to a better understanding of, say, feminist theory in this case, or it could be Marxist theory or post-colonial theory. And that in itself is really liberating, and that's what I really like about this class, and why I like teaching it. Sometimes you might even hear me say that I think that theory can save your life. That I think a lot of people think that reading a book, a novel, or a poem has that potential to save your life. But I also think that reading theory and having it change the way that you see yourself in the world can be life-saving, both literally and figuratively. So that's why it's such an important class for me, and an idea that I'd really like to pass on to my students.